Hello everyone! Welcome to the 5th and so far rustiest episode of my rust inhibitor test. I asked in the last video if you wanted a 9-month update, and the response was unanimously yes. Now if you're watching this, you probably have a great idea already of how this experiment is structured, but just in case you're new here, let me give you a quick rundown of what's going on. I have 2 sets of identical mild steel samples. One set is screwed to the wall inside my workshop where it has been living a pampered life out of the rain and snow. The other set has been hanging around outside, catching some rays, working on its tan, and it's all paying off. This set is looking nicely bronzed. All the samples are bent into L shapes so I can test whether there's a performance difference to the sprays on vertical and horizontal surfaces. I'm testing 9 different sprays along with a bare piece of steel that acts as a control. Let's take a look at the outdoor samples since they're the only ones that look any different. First of all, we have the family photo showing all the samples together. From the right, we have our control, then Cosmoline, Bow Shield, SPF 400 from CRC, Spray-On LU710, Loctite PC 9660, LPS3, WD-40 corrosion inhibitor, regular old WD-40, and last but not least, fluid film. Let's take a look at the current picture compared to the one from the 6-month update. Doing this was suggested by Murray Robinson a couple of videos back. Thanks for the suggestion, Murray. Before we get to looking at the samples, I want to address some concerns I have. When I started this experiment, I bought some mild steel sheet, cut it up, bent it, all that jazz, but I ended up 1 piece short. So I asked a sheet metal worker friend of mine if he could cut me some mild steel pieces and bend them just like the ones I had already made. He cut several for me, which is good because I added fluid film after my initial video. But it's also bad because I'm not sure if they are indeed mild steel. If we look at my outdoor samples, every sample has at least some rust now except for the last 2 on the left, the WD-40 and the fluid film. Those are both samples that my friend cut for me, as is the fluid film sample on the inside of my shop. I don't have 100% confidence that they are what I think they are, so here's what I plan to do. I'm going to wrap this phase of the experiment up in December and start a second round where I test some homebrew rust inhibitors as well as some that people suggested that didn't get tested this time. I'm going to retest the plain WD-40 and the fluid film in that test. And this time I'm going to cut all the samples myself out of known material. If you have a suggestion for a rust inhibitor that I should try in the next round, either homebrew or commercially available, let me know down in the comments section and I'll try to work it into the test. Now, let's get back to the science. The rust has only gotten heavier on the control sample and it looks like we might be getting a bit of pitting on the horizontal surface now. The vertical surface is faring a little better as expected since the water can drain off of it. However, there's still quite a bit of rust there too. It's been pretty dry and hot here this summer, but what rain we have gotten has generally been thunderstorms, so quite heavy rain with high winds. Let's look at how those conditions have affected our other samples. There is a marked difference in the Cosmoline sample this time around. Originally, the Cosmoline went on as a thick, waxy film that had weathered considerably by the 6-month update, and it looks like the heat of the summer finished off what was left. 3 months ago, this sample was still very clean, with only some minor staining around the edges. Now, it's almost completely covered in rust, and has a lot more staining on the vertical leg than the other samples. The Bow Shield sample was looking pretty rough last time, and it's only gotten worse. You can see localized spots of very heavy rust that are indicative of pitting beginning to form. The rust on the vertical leg has also started to get a bit worse, especially down here in the corner. This spray went on very thin and had already started to discolor significantly by the 1-month update, which has only gotten worse over time. I think it's safe to say that the metal is entirely unprotected at this point. The SP400 from CRC has paralleled the Cosmoline throughout this test, and this one is no different, with the exception of the giant pile of guano adorning the horizontal leg of this sample. While I can't see what the surface looks like under Turd Mountain here, the rest of the surface is now quite rusty, including some very heavy spots that look like pitting is underway. The vertical leg is still pretty clear except for a few spots in the corner and along the edges. It's pretty much the same story for the spray-on LU710, as has been the case from the very beginning. This one went on as a slightly thinner waxy coating that held up well in the first few updates, with only minor signs of weathering. Now though, that film has largely gone the way of the dodo, and the sample is absolutely covered with heavy rust on the horizontal leg. This spray had a very powerful stream that made it difficult to get even coverage, and you can see that on the vertical leg. There are darkened areas where the film was thickest, and rusty areas where the thin spots were. The stain that was visible in the corner before has now spread across the entire length of the sample. The Loctite PC9660 sample is largely rust-free, but the film has become dried out and cracked with quite a bit of discoloration. This was the thickest spray of all the types we tested, and it was hard to get consistent coverage on the part. That's pretty apparent in the rust that's forming in the thinner spots. The brown color is significantly darker now than it was 3 months ago, so it'll be interesting to see whether all that turns to rust in December. The LPS3 sample is looking the best out of all the samples that are definitely made out of mild steel. It's still relatively clean, although there is a good bit of rust forming around the edges. There are also a lot of small rust spots forming on both legs of the sample. I mistook these spots for dirt in the previous update. There's also now a large brown stain under my favorite plucky little pile of dried up film that's extending out into these rust spots on the right. I can only assume that's a large, healthy population of super tetanus. In all seriousness though, I have a feeling this rust will be significantly worse in the next update, but we'll just have to see. Like almost every other sample, the WD-40 corrosion inhibitor is now thoroughly coated with corrosion. There is such a dramatic difference between today and the picture from the last update that I had to double and triple check that I was looking at the correct picture. It's interesting to note that in the previous update I pointed out this mountain shape, and I assumed the dark stains above it were corrosion beginning to form. I've actually got that flipped. The mountain appears to be where the film was thinner or got washed away, while the darker areas are still relatively rust-free, albeit with some rust creeping in from the edges. Once again, the WD-40 and fluid film samples are suspect, and I think they're either stainless or coated with something to keep the rust at bay. I did lightly sand these beforehand just like I did with the other samples, but if there's a coating on them, I obviously didn't sand through it. One check that I can do is touch the samples with a magnet. Stainless is either not magnetic at all or not very magnetic compared to the steel. They are indeed magnetic, so I think they're probably coated with a layer of tin, since they don't have the look of galvanized steel. Who knew? Leaving stuff outside for 9 months produces rust. Now let's go inside and check on the samples in there that have just been lounging around with all the insects and spiders in my shop. Once again, there really is not much to report on these. They've collected a few more bugs and a bit of dirt in the last few months, but otherwise they're still doing fine. This definitely illustrates that any spray will work well when the item is stored indoors, although it is interesting to note that even the control is still in relatively good shape. This is definitely not the case with some of the unprotected surfaces in my shop. Ironically, some of the worst rust I'm getting is happening under the tarps and plastic drop cloths I've laid over everything to protect them from the leaking roof. My guess is the covering is trapping the moisture underneath it and never allowing any condensation that forms to dry out. Still, the rust is more manageable than it would be if I let the roof leak all over it. That said, I think I'm going to try to incorporate that into the next round of testing and have a third set of covered samples inside just to see what happens. I think this is a classic example of how answering one question can lead you to asking new ones. Stay tuned for the next update, which will be a wrap-up to this phase of the experiment and the kickoff to the next one with a brand new set of samples. Again, if you have a suggestion for a spray I should try, either commercially available or homebrew, let me know down in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you think I've earned it, and please consider supporting the channel over on Patreon like the fantastic people you see on your screen right now. You might also want to check out these other videos. On the right, I have a playlist of all the other videos where I put things like this to the test. On the upper left, I have my most recent video, and on the lower left, there's a video that YouTube thinks you'll like just as much as this one. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.